What's up, everybody, and welcome to Growing Up Gaming, your weekly podcast where we meet a new person of the internet to discuss their childhood with gaming and how it inspired their lives today. My name is Mitch Power. Again, thank you guys so much for returning each and every week to the show. Hope you're subscribing there on iTunes or Google Play or Spotify or YouTube. And if you're checking me out on any of those methods, I greatly appreciate it. This week on the show, we have our guest. His name is Jarrett Green. I met this man with the help of Twitter. He was nice enough to come on the show and share all of his stories with me. If you guys want to be on the show just like he was, send me a tweet at MitchPower1116 on Twitter or at the podcast Twitter page, which is at GUG Podcast on Twitter. Without further ado, let's get things started with Jarrett Green. Do you remember what initially got you started playing games? Was it a family member? Was it a friend? Was it some kiosk you saw at a mall? Like, what got you started?
I don't know.
Good answer.
It's like, I can't really pinpoint the first time I really got into games. Like, even if it was a person introducing me to a game and then me playing it, I don't know that that got me into gaming. It kind of just got me into playing that game with that person.
Right.
Probably like reading magazines got me into games, because as a kid, like, no one's buying you video games. Like, my mom was a single mom with 3 kids. She didn't have money for video games, but we were always in the grocery stores and always be like reading game magazines. It kind of made you wonder, like, of the limited gaming sort of direct experience I had, then you read these magazines and think, wow, there's like hundreds more of those that are completely different. Like, the sort of imagination of what the games industry was when I was a kid kind of was part of like the real catalyzing sort of, I guess, initial interest in me going to way into it or trying to appreciate it when I could afford to. So,
right. I remember, yeah, the video, like, I remember, it's funny you say that same thing. I kind of grew up not so fortunate, me and my 2 sisters. But yeah, like, it's funny because you mentioned grocery store trips, and like, yeah, I remember those grocery store trips staring at game magazines. Like, just wondering, oh, look at all this stuff. Look at all these games that are out that I've never heard of or seen in my life.
That, and like, back when we had like video games on TV, like, it wasn't like the G4 sort of GameSpot TV stuff wasn't always the best content necessarily, if you were going to put it up against literally any other TV show. But it was the first time, and really the only reliable time, video games would be on TV. Someone would be introducing you to a developer or a game, or reviewing games on a regular basis. They serve the same purpose, I guess, as like a video game magazine, which is just an exposing you to a culture that you may not be able to directly sort of interact with at the time, but kind of gave me anyway, like, a really good way in.
Yeah, I mean,
like,
also,
even for temporary purposes. Or
yeah, I mean, it also got you talking points as well. Like, even if you weren't necessarily into it as much as you could have been due for whatever reason, you know what I mean? But at least if you still had reviews to talk about, or just, you know, things, you were part of that community, even if it wasn't something you were directly playing, you at least could have talking points on it and be part of that conversation with other people.
Right.
So, do you remember, like, the first game that you played? Or the first console that you had or anything?
The first console I had was an NES, but it was an NES, like, sort of late in the game. It was around the time, I guess, SNES debuted is when I had my NES. And it wasn't really my NES. It was like an NES I somehow came about, maybe like a yard sale or something. But it wasn't owned by me. It was owned by a friend of mine who, like, we played together with. Like, we kind of swapped back and forth. I remember playing, like, literally anything. So I've played, like, maybe the most games, besides maybe in the modern era, like on PC or whatever, the most games I've played on a console have probably been the NES games. Like, literally anything that was a game on the NES, I probably played if it was in front of me. I wasn't so discerning back then.
Well, yeah, also, like, when you're younger, you don't have, it's not like you have, like, a library of games to just go choose from. You kind of get what you get and don't throw a fit.
And I'm like generally more interested in like maybe like more nonsensical stuff, like things I wouldn't play now because I would consider like either not a waste, but like rote or something that I just wouldn't find interesting in. Like young me would play because just the simple opportunity to play the game made it interesting. Like I didn't have to think much harder than that. Like, am I running and jumping? Am I breathing fire for some reason? I don't know. Like, there was no critical thinking. It was like, yo, this is a game. I can play that, I guess.
Yeah, there's some games that are just, you turn off your brain and just go have fun, which, I mean, there's still games that are like that for me. Like, I mean, you know, obviously back then I was playing anything that was in front of me. Like, regardless of whether it was good or bad, like, if I had the opportunity to have a game in front of me, I was going to, try it at least. Because there's plenty of games I played back then that were just not good games. But also, too, at the same time, there's games that are just mind-numbing and just whatever. Like, and it's the same thing now, because, like, there's games like, for example, Trials, the newest one, Trials Rising. Those Trials games, I love to death. They're really fun. They're a challenge to, like, get the top, platinum and gold and all the levels and stuff. But also, at the same time, it's like, I can just play that game and bullshit around. Or Skate 3. Like, that's a game that I can completely just bullshit around in and not think about anything and listen to a podcast or whatever. Like, there was those types of games back then as well, but also there was more of, like, not really an option. And so it's not like I had an option to go play all the great games. It was like, what do you have in front of you? That's kind of what you got to deal with.
Right. And I think it turned into I have to deal with it these days, where before I was like really just super interested in it because I had a natural just curiosity of like, I didn't know who made these games. I didn't know where they came from. Just like someone did this and it's super, I'm so interested in consuming everything this someone did. Like, it was still magic back then.
Right.
Like, so that it could even exist was like enough for me to at least like pour it out. I think even in ways, I think if there's anything that has sort of come with me over the years is that same appreciation. Now I do know who makes them and like do know how they're made and do know the rigor and the process that can be involved in the trials and tribulations that can come from them. So there's always an appreciation, even if like I'm reviewing one and it's like not a game I love. I at least am approaching it I'm always trying to approach it from the idea that someone did make this, and there's an idea here. What was the idea? I think it's good. It helps me appreciate, or helps me not be so sort of, I don't know, jaded or butthurt about when things in gaming don't really happen the way I want them, or don't really happen, or makes me appreciate that they can happen in many different ways, and there is no one right answer to how a game can exist. Yeah,
like that was my big thing, is that now I think obviously with the internet and just being a lot more informed, we have a greater appreciation of game and development, and also just, obviously some games come out and they're bad. The worst thing is when sometimes games come out and they're bad and the developer kind of knows like this game isn't that great. But obviously, there's still a lot of hard work that goes into everything. I remember when I was younger, again, like you said, the games were magic, right? It was just a matter of, I don't know how this is made, but this is amazing that this is in front of me. And I remember for the longest time I kept telling my family I want to be a video game programmer. Until I took one programming class and you're like, holy shit. And I swear to God, there was, cause it's like, oh, it's math and stuff, which I'm really good at math. So I was fine there. I was like, cool. I can learn how to do this. I initially wanted to do A+ certification, which is actually like building computers, not programming, but I got thrown into C+ certification because my counselor hates me. And one course of like all these lines of code. All right, go ahead and hit enter and see what happens. And I typed all this shit out and I hit enter and a circle showed up on the screen. And that's it. And I immediately was like, you gotta be fucking kidding me, right? All this I did for a circle on the screen. And literally it's the only class I ever failed on purpose because I immediately was like, this is ridiculous. I'm never gonna. And as soon as that class happened, the whole video game programmer idea went right out the window. I'm like, I cannot begin to think about how complex a video game is, let alone everything I did for a circle. And I get that you know, you have to learn the basics to be able to get to the advanced stuff. Like, I completely get that, but I couldn't fathom doing that all the time or trying to figure out more complex shit. Granted, now game development's a bit easier because of, you know, Unity and, you know, Unreal, like, you know, like there's different, you know, tool sets that are out there that make developing games easier. Good for them. But getting to the point where you get to that, like an engine, like making an engine has to be a nightmare. And I couldn't fathom it. So now, like, when I see certain technical achievements, I'm just like, dude, good for you guys. Like, I don't know how the hell you did all that, but I mean, I appreciate it. But, you know, it is still sad because sometimes, you know, a game comes out and a developer's like, they know, like, I wish this was better, or I wish we had more time to do this because it's not as good, but we had to get it out for X, Y, and Z reason or whatever. You know what I mean? That's the only thing that's a little unfortunate, but, you know, it happens though. But again, too, at the same time, just, we talked about earlier, hey, gamers, stop bitching about everything. Like, somebody where I would love for you, especially people that, like, there's people that make games and it's just them making the whole thing. Like,
yeah, like imagine dude. Axiom Verge. Like, my guy did literally everything. All the coding, all the level design, the programming, the art, the music. Like, that's why that game took like 7 years to make, right? Because he was making it in his spare time.
And then how fucking dare any of you to go and go, man, that game is trash. Like, I would kill it's impossible.
And listen, I like Axiom Verge. I don't love Axiom Verge, but I can't sit and the idea, like, I've read comments like on Steam or whatever where it's like, this is lazy design. This is and I'm like, are you kidding me? Like, one dude did all this and you're calling it lazy? Like, that's not a fair assessment at all. Like, and
again, the problem
I guess some of that is like, he's also not a being critical, but like, it's also like kind of like offensive. Like, you don't have to love the game to at least respect what happened to make this game.
Right, exactly. The problem is like that guy might be one of those uninformed people who doesn't realize like this game is made by one guy, so he's just bitching into the void of like, oh, this game is trash, when you don't realize like, hey, 400 people didn't work on this game, because if they did, it probably would have been out better, and it might have made some better things that you might have liked better, but one guy in his spare time did this shit. Like,
also, there's just like generally speaking, there are relatively few games that are just trash, right? Like, that are just absolute garbage. Like, right. Most games are probably just somewhere in the middle. Right. But a game that's completely absolute garbage, there's like remarkably few of those, I think.
Right. Like, if you look at like a review scale on IGN or something like that, most games don't get a 2 or a 3. Like, right. If a game gets a 2 or a 3 on IGN, that shit's real bad. Like, no one gave a shit about making that game at all. But, you know, the problem is people get in their head, like, a game is a certain thing, and if it doesn't live up to that expectation, they're going to call it the worst thing ever, which is not fair to say. Just go, oh, you know, didn't meet expectations, not, this game is fucking garbage. Like, to go with those extremes, right? It's either the best game ever or garbage. There's not like, it was good, it was average, it was okay. No, it's like the worst or the best, unfortunately.
Or like even more nuanced than that. Like, there are something in this game that I did not like. I've seen this done in different games better. Like, that's when you're really saying something. And no one is like, and you know, the mistake is like scrolling through Steam reviews or like Metacritic, like customer reviews, and expecting something like that. But like real dialogue about a game being good or bad, or what a game can do for its genre or its culture, it only begins when someone says that something's good or bad. Like, and it's impossible to have a really valuable conversation about the goodness or badness of a game without really identifying what about it is good or bad.
Right. They just want to blanket the whole thing as bad when, like, these 4 things could be good, but this one thing you didn't like, so you're just going to say the whole thing's bad? Like,
right. You didn't like this one thing, and, like, maybe that one thing is a turnoff because it's so vital. It's way more important to the entire piece than, you know, the 4 other things that are good combined. But that's up to you to say, like, if you're going to be the commenter. Like, and you know, part of it is not everyone. It's not everyone's job to think critically, right? Like,
sure.
Some people just want to be in the comment section and say what they feel.
They just want to get their opinion out there, which social media, unfortunately, has given everybody a voice that,
right.
That they feel that everybody should hear, which that's why I don't post a whole lot on social media, because guess what? Nobody gives a shit what I have to say.
And social media in and of itself is like another form of content, I guess. Like it is like, it's not like writing a review or making a video about like an op-ed or something, but you do have to type a thing with the recognition that a lot of people are going to see it. So you're doing this for yourself, but you're also doing it for a viewer. So that's like when someone says content, that's kind of what they mean if you're not saying it. Like, someone's going to read this tweet. So like, what are you saying with it? What do you want them to know when they read the tweet? Like, do you want them to, what are they allowed to take from this? Or what are you giving them to take from this? And no one really thinks like, maybe if I shouldn't just shit post the first thing I'm thinking about this game in the worst fashion. Like, maybe I could like take 3 minutes and think about a little harder and have something real to say. Yeah. Or if I'm not a person who can do that, maybe I don't have to do anything. Like, maybe I don't have to be part of the conversation. Or I can find someone who is saying the things that I want to say in a more eloquent fashion, and I'll just co-sign that shit. Like, right. I don't know. Yeah, the discourse
we didn't have that
got
back
me
in the
here
day,
is like never around. They didn't, but in a way they did, right? Like, video game like magazines were the co-opting voices because we couldn't participate in a grander conversation with millions of people at a time back in 1995. But there was a conversation being had, and the pace of that conversation was monthly because that's when like magazines would come out. So like, you maybe if you had friends who read the same magazines, that would be the catalyst of your conversations. Or, writing into these places to try to get it back and forth with them. Or, I mean, more importantly, you could never find a way to have a conversation so that you just couldn't then. Because maybe, and for many of those people, it was probably better that way because you weren't going to be adding anything valuable to the conversation anyway.
Well, the other thing, too, is
there's no locks. It's like,
when we were younger, too, as being kids, like, we didn't have that critical thinking. We just had fun. Like, I really don't remember many people saying back in the day, like, when I was younger, like, kids, like, friends of mine saying, this game is garbage or this game is bad.
Yeah.
Or, you know what I mean?
When
like,
I was a kid, there were no bad games. They were all just
right.
games.
Like, people were just happy to play games. And then I think it's when you become teenager, when you start actually forming, opinions that could be constructive, but then you're too immature to actually do it, so you just fucking say how many things are garbage. And now, like, again, now there's that culture of like being on social media, like outrage culture, but also like that troll culture, you know what I mean? Just like, fuck this game, it's trash, and you don't say why, you just throw that out there just to piss people off. So
yeah, and you get like 3 likes, and that was the only reason you were here for anyway. So
right. I hope those 3 likes made your life that much better for you to shit post on something good some company did, or you know what I mean? Like, you get those things, but, thankfully, my kids haven't gotten to that point yet. Like, my son, for example, I bought my son Fallout 76 for his birthday, and he's a huge Fallout fan, and he plays online with his friends. So he was jazzed about 76, and I was not. I just didn't give a shit about it. But, son's birthday, wanted to get it for him. I got it for him. A week later, I go in his room, he's playing Fallout 4. I'm like, what are you doing? And he's like, Dad, it's not good. And I'm like, really? He's like, and I knew, right? But I'm not trying to shit on his games, right? So I'm just like, really? He's just like, yeah, Dad, like, it's buggy and it's not that fun, and I just have more fun with Fallout 4. I'm like, well, I'm sorry to hear that. Like, that kind of sucks. He's like, yeah, they might do some patches later and hopefully it'll get better. But again, he didn't go like, fuck this game, it's garbage. But he's still in that mode where he's like, my son's going to be 13 this year. 13 this year. So it's like, or 14. I'm so stupid, Alex. I'm sorry. My son just came in. He's like, 14, Dad. God damn it.
Idiot.
Right. But no, like, he hasn't got to the point yet where he's gotten that critical of it. He's still having fun with most games, but yeah.
But there is still a kernel of criticism, right? Like, there's something wrong with 76 that he doesn't find in Fallout 4. And maybe he hasn't identified these things exactly, but he knows there's a difference. and recognizes that like just because this difference exists doesn't necessarily make it like absolute trash, but there's something there that he's not looking for that he'll find in 4 instead.
Right, exactly. So I mean, and again, like at least he hasn't gotten to that point yet where, you know, it's either the worst thing ever or the best thing ever. He's just like, you know, he's not upset by it, but he's just like, yeah, you know, I'm just having a little bit more fun with Fallout 4. So he's been playing that instead. So, but like I said, back then, when you're young, I think it's just when you're younger, you know what I mean? Like just
probably, yeah. Like I had no interest in like thinking all that hard about them. I was just
exactly.
Really
you were just like hitting buttons and having colors happen on the screen. So,
and I was really way more interested in like letting someone else tell me if this game is good, and then I'll just play that. And then I think when I was younger, especially, I would see all the things that someone else would say is good about a game, and then just be like, yeah, it's probably good, and then just play it, and then just completely agree. Like, yeah, it's definitely good.
Yeah, very rarely. I mean, the only thing that's like the adults back then in the gaming magazines when we were kids basically were kind of doing the good thinking for us when they would just say this game is good, this game is bad. But also at the same time, if you look at some of the reviews back then, they reviewed some bad games well. I don't know.
Yeah, and maybe it's bad in the context that we know, like it's been done better, or they were just straight up bad. But I think even the critics were bad at criticism back then too.
Right. Well, also there wasn't
they were
a lot
out here
to
just trying to play
against
games
either. You know what I mean? It's not like they had 30 years of gaming before it. You know what I mean? They were just kind of going off of what was in front of them then, and like.
Yeah, and you know, I think criticizing, like just the act of criticizing, gets better as a thing gets better too.
Of course, right. It's hard to compare and contrast when the medium's still not new, but newer. You know what I mean? Like now it's way easy to compare a game that's old compared to a game that's new. It's way easy to like, you know, have that kind of contrast to look back on. But even when you look back on certain games and they still are doing well compared to new games, like they set the trend for how new games should be, right? But then you go back at some of the games around the same time and they're just not that great. Like, obviously nostalgia glasses make you think certain older games are better than they are, and then you go back and play them, and some people can separate that and some people can't. Because some people, like, when Crash, the whole trilogy came out and shit, people were losing their mind, and I'm like, I don't remember Crash being that great of games. Like, I remember them being okay, but like people were freaking out like it was fucking the second coming of Jesus. And then
the Crash is a good point, because I remember playing all the Crash Bandicoot games.
Me too.
I remember liking them, but I remember distinctly thinking like as I got older, knowing that I don't really need to go back to them, like identifying what problems I had with them, like post years after they came out. Like I remember playing them and thinking, I like this, but I don't love it. I wonder why. And then thinking on it every time I play another like 3D platformer since, like I can identify all the reasons I don't like Crash now. I think they did the same with Sonic. Like,
oh yeah,
it's one of those. Yes, exactly. So when people like remember these games as like incredible games, it's kind of like, what are we speaking critically, or are we just talking? Are we just talking about like what we like?
Right.
I guess one of the big dynamics of today is like, is it necessary to speak critically? Can people just like shit, like, and just go out and say whatever they want and kind of just live at that? I guess that's fine, right? Like,
no, yeah, I mean, nobody has to like always critique games. I mean, there's some people out there that will fucking fine tooth comb any game out there, right? They'll critique, oh, you know what, man, the lighting in this didn't look that well. Like, this shadow looked wrong. There was jaggies on. Like, just shut up. Like, just look at what's in front of you and try to enjoy it. Like, but at the same time, when I was younger, it was in that because I had Crash 3, and I 100% had Crash 3. Like, I played it to death. But then starting to think back on it, when this Crash trilogy got announced and all that stuff, I just thought, like, thinking back, like, there were some things in those games that weren't as fun. So, like, I didn't see the big outrage or big freak out for it. And then it was kind of funny when people did finally get the game and start playing it again, especially Crash 1. And they were just like, oh, like running towards the camera from a ball. Like that's
maybe that's
weird.
Bad idea. And the camera zoomed in so
close
that like the obstacle is just supposed to have like this sort of reaction against there's almost not enough time to make this work really.
Right.
Maybe this is design to be just lived with and like back into time, but isn't actually good design.
Right. But also too, that was them still figuring out 3D platformers. So that was like, again, at the time they were like, this is cool. And again, people loved Crash back in the day, but sometimes nostalgia glasses make you think a game's better and it's not, but it happens. But I mean, there's still games that hold up and everything. So do you remember, like, cause obviously you had siblings and everything. Were they younger or older?
I have a twin sister.
Okay.
And an older brother.
Gotcha. So did you play a lot of co-op games with them, or were they just not really into games?
No, I'm the only gamer in my house.
Wow. That sucks. Even your older brother? How much older was he, though?
2 years.
Like, that sucks, dude. Like,
I'm the only person that gives a shit.
Wow. So because I was going to say, because most of the time back in the day when game consoles, like when we got a game console in the house, it was like a family gift. However, it was mine. Like, my sisters didn't really play. My parents didn't really play. You know what I mean? So for the most part, it was mine. But so did your mom get it like that, and then they just didn't care about it, or she was just like, no, this is kind of your thing?
I think it was supposed to be like a me and my sister thing.
Right.
And she bounced off it pretty quickly. Wow. So it became a thing that was mine. But it also, at that time, it seemed very clear that this was something I was very into. So, like, shortly after, any gaming related thing was definitely just mine.
Right. Like
that was the same amount of time when I wanted to be, like, I think I when I was younger, especially Super Nintendo days, I think I had convinced myself that maybe making these things might have been something I wanted to do. Mm-hmm. So that became like that became my thing, I guess.
Right. Was your mom pretty encouraging as far as gaming goes, or did she kind of get it to make you happy, or did she encourage you to do other things besides play games?
I don't think she got it. I think, in ways she still doesn't.
Right.
But I think what her relationship with it now was a lot like like what it was then. Like, now I sort of have worked and do in still ancillary ways work in the business. And I think that was always like a goal of mine, is being a part of this business in some way. So being exposed to it now was kind of like or when I was younger was kind of like necessary if this is something that I really thought was going to be a thing for me. So it was both like, yeah, make me happy, but also like, maybe you should have every opportunity I can give you to get involved with this.
Right. I mean, as long as she was, because you get those parents that are out there who just straight go, no, this is stupid. Go do something better with your time or whatever. Right. But then there's parents that actually see the merit and see that it makes you happy, but also that's not just, in your case, the cool thing is that, you getting to the point where at a young age you thought, like, this is part of an industry I want to be in, and then making that happen. Like, that's awesome. You know what I mean? That's great.
Yeah, she wasn't, she definitely, at the very least, wasn't
discouraged,
resistant against it, or discouraging about it. I don't know that she was like the most encouraging about it, but she definitely didn't stop me from it.
Right. It wasn't something that, she made a point to like keep you away from it or anything.
Right.
So.
And then up until I started working, she was like the only way I was getting these things. So.
Right. Exactly. Yeah. Cause that's the prayer. Like, again, that's the hard part, is when your parents aren't encouraging about it. It's especially when that's like the only thing you ask for, like some parents get all pissy, like, don't you want anything besides video games? And, even my wife did that to my son. Like, all he cares about is video games. I'm like, he's a boy. Yeah. Like, he's like, he first off, I didn't help the fact that he's into games. You know what I mean? Like, I'm sorry. Mm-hmm. I have everything. He's seen everything from the day he's been born. So like, he and his friends, all they do is play games, and that's all they're doing now. Like, some kids are like that. Like, at one point in time, that's really all I did. But then I got into sports and other things. Like, eventually he'll get into other things. But even if he doesn't, it's not like it's a problem. You know what I mean? He's going to enjoy video games probably for the rest of his life. And if he doesn't, that's cool. Like, some people play video games up until they get to college, and then they're so busy with school and jobs afterwards that they just drop out of it. Or some people get kids and they just don't have time for games. You know what I mean? Like, there's so many things where you could drop out of it, but I mean, if that's a passion of his, I'm not going to shit on it. Especially, it'd be real hypocritical of me to go, you need to stop playing games when you see me playing games all the time. But even my wife, she'll, the other thing too now though is that how the internet has made gaming so social, right? Like, he'll get into a lobby with his friends and just bullshit and talk about whatever. You know what I mean? Like, that's how they hang out now. Like, whereas I keep telling everybody, like my father-in-law, I keep trying to tell them, like, think of this. Like, if you had access to the internet at your age, would you have left your fucking house to go to your friend's house and sit? No. If you had access to the internet, you would have used it the same way he is now. You would have hung out at your house and hung out and played games with your friends that way. We didn't have access to that. That wasn't an option for us. So we had to leave the house and go over friends' house and do those types of things. You know what I mean?
Yeah, like you're not necessarily better friends or better kids because you had to ride your bike to your friend's house because you couldn't call them or you couldn't Skype them or whatever. Like just because you had to struggle to do it doesn't make you better at it. Like,
right, exactly.
Kids now are like, can do these things without having to do half the things I had to do it. Like that does, and they still have the same sort of bonds with their friends, and they get to see it. They can communicate with their friends every night. Like when I was a kid, I might see my friends like once a week maybe because they're farther away from me or something. Like no matter where their friends are now, they can call them or play a game with them or whatever. Like.
Right.
It's easier now than ever to like make friends and then like be long lasting friends.
Exactly. Yeah. I'm thinking like back in the day, if my friend was like gone with his family somewhere, I was like, okay, I guess I'll just see that dude later.
Hey, it's just me and this book for a week. I guess.
Exactly. But now it's like, hey, I'm just going to text him or, hey, I'll FaceTime him or, you know what I mean? You can do all of that stuff now. So yeah, I mean, it's just, again, if I had the internet, dude, I'd be doing the same shit. And again, like once I got the internet, it made, like, example, right now, having the internet has made me have more friends than I ever could because I don't get to leave the house often because I'm working and then I'm doing stuff with the family. So as far as friend time goes, I have my games and then I also have meeting all you awesome people who happen to be guests on my show. Like, this is how I've been able to interact with people. Like, me and you talked about UFC for like 45 minutes before we started recording the show. I wouldn't have anybody else around right now that I could talk about UFC with, but right there, that made it easier. But
right.
People that are out there who are just like, oh man, kids need to get out and play more. I am encouraging physical activity. You should not be a hermit just sitting in your home. But the whole like, oh, he's just playing games. No, he's talking to his friends. Like, he's hanging out with his buddies right now. That's right. What he's doing.
Yeah, he's not just in there. I mean, there are definitely examples of people kind of just like it's not very social, or it's not as social as, you know, all your friends play the same game. But I think you can't take the worst example and apply it to everyone, right? Like, there's a great chance your kid is actually playing games with their friends. And if you think that they aren't, and it is like something that's turning into them kind of just running into a corner and like not doing anything, like the answer isn't they don't just take the game from them or like demonize the games, but it's like maybe also encourage them to do other things and like be a part of them doing the other things and like, you know, try to bring the balance to them, but don't like remove this whole thing because you think it's like it even in and of itself is some sort of caustic growth stunting thing.
Right.
Like, that's not true or fair.
Right. Exactly. Yeah. I mean, like I said, I still encourage people to have more than just one hobby. Like, obviously you should be out there challenging yourself and like doing different things just to get experience of like maybe something you will like if you try it. But at the same time, like those parents that were out there like, no, you're never playing games. Like, that's crazy. Like, I can't imagine discouraging my kids unless he's like, I want to do meth, dad. Like, that's the only thing I'm going to tell you. Like, no, you probably shouldn't do that, like, ever. But
also, like, games are maybe not only one of the biggest businesses on the planet right now, but it's also maybe the most emergent sort of media that exists right now. And there might not be another games as far as media is concerned. Like, it is the kind of media that's going around right now. Like, reading and video and audio, like, very few of those things intersect the same way as they do in games. And then also as an interactive component, like, I don't know why you would want your kid to not play games, because everything about playing a game is something that you would want your kid to do anyway. Like, challenging themselves, learning new skills, like learning problem solving. Like, even if you're playing Fortnite, all those things apply. Like, and, you know, maybe some social interaction sort of stuff also might apply. Like, there's no reason that this would be something that's so like detrimental to your child you want to keep them away from it. Like,
right.
If you want your kids to learn how to do the things they would learn how to do, you know, maybe not everything. It's not the same exact way, same exact sort of lessons as playing football or something, right?
Sure.
But the lessons are there if you want to think about them that way.
Yeah. I mean, everything out there is going to have some sort of benefit, and also but also I'm not expecting my kids to like everything. Like my son during school was playing flag football, and he was really having fun with it. And I'm like, cool. If you ever want to do that outside of school, just let me know. Like, never going to discourage you from doing something, because obviously I want them to be encouraged to try new things out there. But yeah, I mean, again, I just think, obviously I think parents, it depends on actually, I guess, the parents, because some parents out there are just straight like, no, you're not doing this. And that's like a hard stance. Like, no, you're not doing this. And they have that feeling for whatever reason. But also at the same time, like, doing that would take away something that, the one thing you don't want to do is you don't want to be the last kid to be doing anything either. Like, because that's just going to make your kid the outcast out there. Like, it's like, you don't want to be the last kid who doesn't have a cell phone, because then you're just like, wow, why don't you have a cell phone? You don't want to be the last kid, but you want to at least have your kids have these experiences and see how they come from there, like see what happens from that. But, my son right now, he cares about 3 things: Nerf guns, Legos, and video games. And, he's getting something out of each. So, right. And of course, when he's grounded from his games, like, I just take away the most important thing when he's grounded. So, did you ever get to the point where, were you ever a kid who ever got in trouble and that was like the number one thing your mom took away immediately?
Yeah, that's like the only thing.
Right, basically.
It's like the only thing I was definitely going to do. Like, and after a while, like, I don't know that it's because I was into a bunch of other stuff too. So like, I could find a way to entertain myself, but that was clearly the one I was going to all the time. And it was the one that had the biggest place in my life. So taking it from me was definitely an effective punishment. I mean, effective is the word. Like, I definitely felt punished when it happened. Did it ever stop me from doing bad things ever again? Probably not. But
right. There were still times where you act out, but also you're a kid and you don't have that developed brain to
right.
realize, recognize.
I'm not
things.
I'm not doing great like cost analysis and like doing dumb shit and the punishment that happened to it.
Exactly. Right. No, I mean, like I said, but also when you're a kid, you make stupid decisions, but then, the only thing you can do is encourage them, try not to do it again by taking away the one thing they love very much. Cause that's pretty much the only thing I can do to my kid now. Like, if he gets super upset or whatever, does bad grades in school, first thing it goes, I'm like, okay, your Xbox is gone. And, sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't, but I can tell you when he does the things to get it back, he's considerably happier. So like,
right.
That happens though. So as you were growing up, it's just crazy that, I mean, I understand, like, if say, cause here's the thing that's shitty to say, like, I don't want to say girls weren't into games, but just my sisters weren't into games as much, right? They played games with me, but that just wasn't one of their hobbies. But like, the fact that your older brother wasn't into games is crazy. Like, what was he into instead of games?
Movies.
Okay.
Yeah. I think games is, especially at the time, like, the market was clearly heavy for boys versus girls because of various factors. But I think it's also something that required concentration and kind of like a patience that he didn't have. Like, he has plenty of developmental issues too, so it wasn't really something he couldn't focus on them.
Gotcha. Okay.
Really, he liked them, but he couldn't get better at them.
Right, and that definitely could be a deterrent. You know what I mean? Like, if you like, like if you really like games, but you're just not good at them, that would kind of drive you not away from them, but not really encourage you to continue to play them that much. Right.
So it's easier to kind of like be into music and movies in that way, because it's kind of more of a passive experience.
For sure. No, that makes a lot of sense, actually. Like, that would be, because like I said, like my father-in-law, for example, he likes games, but he just doesn't have time to play them, and like, he enjoys them and he thinks they're great, but also at the same time, he's just like, I just don't have time. Like, I'm just doing all these things. So it's not a matter of, I don't want to play them because I don't like them. It's a matter of like, if I ever get time to play them, that I'd be glad to do it. But
I think a part of it is also like, there's only so many games that you can play without having to like put a real time investment in like being able to play it well.
Right.
Especially now, like, games don't end anymore. Like, games are just things that you can play forever now. They're just services at this point. There's no like, there are no credits rolling. There's no like end of the story. It's like, you just play this forever, I guess, and then we'll give you more levels, or the levels get harder or whatever. So it's hard to. You have to learn the system and then get better at the system. And the only way to do that is to play it, forever.
Right.
And not everybody has
But nobody wants single player
the
games,
patience.
right? It's the stupidest thing I've ever heard. Like, I hate when people are like, nobody wants single player games. Like, there's actually people out there who love single player games. Like,
yeah, and honestly, if the industry had its best opportunity for growth, it's around these single player games where people who don't necessarily play games now might, if it means they can play through a story that they're interested in.
Right.
Like, I know plenty of people who only play single player games because that's the only kind of games you want to play. Like, they only play, like, a friend of mine only played God of War last year because that's the only game that had a beginning and like a long story, beginning and end, like a game that used to make in 2001 that they've been playing. Like, that's the game they want to play.
And I know it's like, as far as it goes, like, if you're like, especially if you have a PS4, that's a great machine for those types of experiences. Like, there's so many good, just single player, cut and dry story, and start end, not definitive overall. Not saying it doesn't have those games, but just like they tend to excel at the single player narrative games. Not saying Xbox doesn't have good ones, but just like example, I love my Xbox. I prefer Xbox over PlayStation. However, 2 years in a row, a PlayStation 4 game was my game of the year. Like, you know what I mean? Like, Horizon,
and Sony, like,
and
they invested heavily in that when they started buying all these studios to make single player games. Like,
right, exactly. And I mean, like, Xbox now has gotten, thankfully, thrown around that big ass Microsoft check. They've bought some studios that do make those excellent single player games, so I'm glad to see that. But yeah, also at the same time, they're like, you know what I mean, they have all the multiplayer stuff as well that they're doing really well in too. So, I mean, I'm happy to see an industry that's good, period, not just, you know what I mean, oh, it's just one. For people to say like, oh, I don't like PlayStation for this reason. Like, obviously each system has their own merits and everybody should play everything just to get experience out of it. Because I would be sad to hear if like people don't get a chance to experience Horizon just because they don't like PlayStation. Like, that's fucking ridiculous. Like,
yeah, that's a weird argument because PlayStation, like, I don't know what a person doesn't like about PlayStation. Like, the same, like, I don't own an Xbox, but I don't dislike Xbox. Like, sure. I chose my PlayStation because I have a lineage of content on my PlayStation.
Sure.
But there's nothing about an Xbox I dislike.
Right. But again, that's where it comes down to people just bitching to bitch, like we talked about earlier. Like, just complain and have a reason to complain. It's
to not like PlayStation just because it's a PlayStation, and even if it's like an infrastructural issue, or like the way the HUD, like on the menu is organized or whatever. Like, it's difficult to then take that criticism and apply it to any individual piece of software that might be on a PlayStation, because chances are there is no correlation, right? Except for the fact that the only place you can play it is on one.
Yeah, I mean, because when I turn on my PlayStation, I play that UI so much, like,
yeah,
I just, like, it's just when people say it's a stupid UI, like, do you fucking spend your time in the menu?
It is a stupid UI, but like, you push two buttons and you're out of the UI. Like,
exactly, you never see the shit. Like, does the UI pop up in the middle of your gameplay? No, it doesn't. Like, shut up. Just, you know what I mean? Like, I am in that boat where the like complaint I have, really one of the only complaints I have about the PlayStation 4 is the controller's battery life is fucking trash. It is not good. But guess what?
I have to plug it in like constantly,
all the time. And you know what though? I plug it in and I never have to think about it again. And I
found a way around it by plugging it the fuck in. Like,
right. Oh my God, I'm so sad that I have to plug in a controller. It's just like when people say that, like, oh, I don't like the battery life in the controller sucks. That's why I don't play. That's why you don't play the entire console. That's why you don't play those games.
Plugging it in like two more times, like a week that you have to normally is why you don't do this. Interesting.
Yeah, exactly. So it's funny because like I remember, there's a book called Console Wars which talks about the NES and Genesis. I never had any conversations where people were just straight like, fuck you for liking Sega, like back in the day. Like, again, and I think it just boils down to like kids just enjoying anything, like whatever's in their face. Like, if somebody's like, if I went to my friend's house and they had a Super Nintendo, I had a Genesis, I wouldn't go, oh, Super Nintendo, I'm not playing that. I'd be like, fuck yeah, let's go. Like,
which is funny because like they made Sega especially made a huge deal out of their rivalry between them and Nintendo. Because they were making lots of
in their ads,
like wild shit, and because they were making such headway, because back then no one really they were just trying to play games, and Sega had games that you couldn't get on Nintendo, right. And that motivated people to buy them. And Nintendo was like Sega was encroaching on Nintendo's lead, like in a way they never thought that would ever happen, because turns out people back then were just way more interested in being curious than they were about being, brand loyal.
Right. Because I'm sorry, but brand loyalty overall kind of dumb. Like
weird. Like the brand doesn't care about you.
They don't. They care about they got your money. Cool. Like,
yeah.
I mean, nobody. It's not like I have stock in Microsoft. It's not like I have a job at Microsoft because, really, if you work at Microsoft, I'm not going to say you can't like other things, but obviously there's some inherent bias. Like, hey, this company pays my bills. Maybe I should say I like this a little bit.
I have friends who work at Microsoft and are like, listen, I use Microsoft products because they're cheaper and they're offered to me at a discounted rate, and I like them because they're part of my life. But that doesn't stop me from also owning all these other things.
Of course,
because they're not the only people in town, and some of these things other people do better. And it's like there's no amount of loyalty that changes that simple real fact. But the loyalty, the reason I'm being paid is so that I can continue representing this brand.
Right.
And those people forget
blown away by the fact that Phil Spencer congratulates Sony. They're like, what the fuck are you doing? Like, he's a human who can like things. Like, it just because he's head of Xbox doesn't mean he has to say fuck Sony or Nintendo at all.
Right. Like they don't exist in this bubble where Xbox is always right. And especially now, they know better.
Right.
If they did before the Xbox One launch, they don't anymore.
Right. That was just such a bad time. Like, I hated those first 2 years after the console launches because everybody was just comparing them left and right, and I'm just like, God, please stop. Just the Xbox has 720p and the PlayStation's 1080p at 30, but this is 60. Why? Just go have fun, go play a game. Why are we talking about this? That's what I'm saying. Back then, I'd never had those conversations where nobody ever bitched about oh, you have a Sega Genesis, that's ridiculous. I don't remember that, but again, you're right. And Sega started that shit with just Sega does when Nintendo don't. Fuck. That's
and it's interesting because I think it worked then, but I think it worked for different reasons then. There were people, so they were Sega and Nintendo kids, but they were Sega and Nintendo kids because that's what they got, not just because they wanted it necessarily.
Correct. Yeah, it was the option they were given. It's not like they had it it's not like they had their own money, spending their own money doing the shit. They had an option and they were, kind of given that option by their parents. So yeah, I mean, the only thing that sucks is we were talking about the aggressive Sega marketing, and then E3 PlayStation fucking drops all that mad shit on Xbox. I mean, it still happens, unfortunately. I don't think it's going to happen nearly as much anymore, though. I
don't think it can. I think the industry is humbling itself because it's spun itself into such an unsustainable state, and things are changing so rapidly.
Right.
The need for these three monolithic companies to build consoles to sit in your house to play video games is no longer there. Now we can play games without even having a console. We just beam it from space and I'm playing a game now.
Right.
That is a future that's undeniable, and I think everybody knows that now. So everyone has to treat each other a bit differently. Dude,
when I saw, also too, I mean, I think I won't say it's so dumb, but obviously with the bully culture now, people are just oh, Sony's bullying Microsoft if they ever did that shit now. But also too, how it just seems over the last at least 2 years, how everybody just seems to want to be making money together and getting along. Nobody's trying to talk shit anymore, And I mean, in a way I'm happy. Unfortunately, fanboys don't see that yet because they're still all over the place. But when I saw that tweet of Sony and Microsoft partnering for the cloud stuff, I literally was like, this is going to fucking make every fanboy's head explode. They're not
people
who
need this, who need the lines to be drawn are going to be confused because they see it as Sony versus Microsoft, but Microsoft and Sony see it as them versus Google.
Yeah, now it's all hey, guess what? Fuck that guy. We're going to team up.
Because even if it's not just games, it's Google and Apple are the biggest tech companies in the world, and that's their game now.
Right.
They've been Apple's been in the video games industry for 15 years, whether they whether they want it to be or not, thanks to the iPhone.
Right.
So they have always been their competition. Mobile games have changed the way you play all video games forever, and there's no turning back. So you have to appreciate you can't just fight each other anymore. And both of them are going to be moving forward in the same ways anyway. This has always been the truth. HD DVDs was a thing. and Blu-rays were a thing at the same time. And it turns out like HD DVDs were a bad idea, or maybe not a bad idea, but Sony was way behind the Blu-ray thing and had lots of money on it. And Blu-rays won because the power of money and porn, basically.
Yeah, basically.
But
Disney and porn.
And it was up to, and Microsoft had to accept the fact that as far as putting things on discs, like infrastructurally, Sony won this one. So you have to play ball. And instead of being like unnecessarily competitive and aggressive towards each other right now, you can just accept that fate early and get it over with. And you guys can work together to do something cool.
Right.
You don't have to, like, this is something that's going to happen. So just appreciate it. Like, it's going to happen. Appreciate the inevitability and just like do it together so that you can get there faster. And then you can go back to like dunking on each other or whatever.
Yeah, exactly. You can get back to shit talking. Like the one thing I was throw so far off by was literally one of the biggest benefits to Microsoft as a company is the fact that they have all these data centers all over the world, right? And they've already had this cloud infrastructure and it's already there. And people prefer Xbox Live over PlayStation because of stability or because of whatever reason, right? It's been around longer. It's got it, it's shit figured out better. I don't know, whatever you want to say. But the fact that like that's the part that Microsoft's going to help Sony with. Who the fuck gets mad at that? Like who on earth can see that and go, God, that's so ridiculous. Like no one should be upset by that at all. If anything, it's just going to make Sony's online infrastructure better. It's going to make their cloud gaming service, whatever they launch, better. And I'm just happy to see now that, these companies are not, because dude, I guarantee you that type of conference, E3 conference when they were mad shit talking Microsoft, that will never happen again. Like between those two, at least, that will never happen.
Yeah. And the sooner that we appreciate that, as soon as that we as like a community can move on the way they are, the easier this becomes for everyone. Like the brands don't necessarily care. Like they want your money. There's a brand loyalty thing that they sort of, there is a cynical way to look at their brand loyalty stuff that says like, yes, they're doing it because they want you to continue buying that stuff. And you know what? Sony probably does give a shit. Like PSX was a fan convention. Like they did these things to appeal to themselves, to this community that has built itself around it because they love it. But also they want you to continue coming back and spending money.
Right.
And the sooner that we, the people who spend the money on the brand to buy consumer goods, recognizes that maybe like this is all for that dollar and they should be working harder for me instead of me doing battle for them in forums or on Twitter to no real avail.
Right.
Like the better we're all going to be living, I think.
Right. It's not like Microsoft is happy that you're being an asshole to a Sony fan in the comment section.
Right.
Like,
they gain zero benefit from me shitting on someone in a Twitter thread or retweeting someone dunking on State of Plays or whatever. Like no one benefits except, the very few people who circle around my content and want to find ways to interact. Sony doesn't care. Microsoft doesn't care. Why do I care?
Right. Exactly. And then now the only thing is that it might all, like you said, though, it might all turn into shit on Google post.
It might.
Now it's just going to be like console gaming in general, like Xbox, PlayStation, Nintendo versus what Google's trying to do. So hopefully that doesn't get to the point because I really just want people to fucking have fun with games and stop complaining and shit. Because back then we never had that problem. So, I mean, hopefully everybody can just be happy with, but even Google people, like I'm not shitting on Google either. Like if there's competition, like I said before, if there's competition, things get better. If Microsoft didn't get its face kicked in this generation, would backward compatibility have been a huge thing? Would Game Pass have been a thing? Would
Game Pass exist?
Right. Except for if Microsoft got its face kicked in, they're like, shit, we got to get our stuff together. What do we need to do? This. And now people look at what they're doing, how Game Pass and how they could do their streaming service, and people are like, holy shit, that could be insane. And now Sony could easily do the same thing. And it's just good for everybody because real fast, Game Pass is amazing. It is literally ridiculous. Like the fact that they're getting, and it's not even like, I'm just shocked that they're getting the games that they're getting because it's not even like all you're getting are indie games. Like they put Shadow of the Tomb Raider on there 6 months after launch. They put Just Cause 4 on there. They put Wolfenstein on. Like they're getting games that aren't just like AA or like indie games. They're getting like AAA games on that shit.
Which is like, I don't know what it takes a person or for a company to get those licenses and get that arranged, but were they motivated to do that 3 years ago? It's clearly not. So whenever we can make a real reaction or some sort of real effect that makes them act this way, that's the best. Like, if we were running out and buying Xbox One's gangbusters, again, the only thing they care about is our money. So we weren't spending it, no matter what we were saying, we weren't spending money on Xbox products, so they had to do something about it. And that's the only way to talk to them. So you really want to be brand loyal, just keep buying and shut up. Exactly. the rest of the shit doesn't matter.
Exactly. None of that matters. So as far as brand loyalty goes, when you were younger, did you go the Genesis route then, or did you stick with Super?
So I didn't have a Genesis, I don't think. For some reason I played a lot of Genesis though. And I remember playing lots of Genesis because I remember that was my first sort of experience in recognizing that games were made differently in different places. You don't find that anymore, but in the Genesis and Super Nintendo days, and basically up until, I guess even cross-platform games like in the PS3 and Xbox 360 eras can be quite different depending on what version you play. But literally, you would play different games with the same name on either Super Nintendo or Genesis, depending on the game. Like Aladdin is a different game, and that was like my first experience in that. Like completely ridiculous. Like never thought. Like thinking about it now is like insane. Like.
To imagine, like something on Xbox and PlayStation, like Assassin's Creed, but being two completely different games.
But being like a completely different game, being like a side scroller versus like a 3D game,
exactly.
And like they are marketed the same way basically. They're called the same thing, except the one on Super Nintendo does something completely different than the one on Genesis. Right.
The only thing I can equivalent it to now is mobile games. That's it.
Maybe and I think even then
mobile out there that share the same name, and I mean I'm talking like the same name. But they're completely different games, just because mobile.
That's true. There are games that are like ported, that end up getting ported to like the iOS or something that are like the game, but like not really.
Yeah, exactly. That's like, but also too, that's due to technical limitations, not a design choice. Like those games could have been the same, but for design choices, they weren't.
Right. So it's still playable to the best of its ability. You have to change the way you interact with the game. Like the core tours are basically the same games that you play on the phone, phone versus what you play on PC.
Right.
But there have been some big changes both graphically and like to the HUD so that you can actually play it on a phone.
Correct. Right. I mean, but that's more of like a design choice, but also technical limitations. Whereas like literally, there was no reason Aladdin's had to be different.
No,
they could.
It's just because they were, because licensing was different then.
Right, exactly. And I mean, even the same case when it came to Super Nintendo, not Super Nintendo, PlayStation and N64, because there were certain limitations there too.
Yes.
But there was different. Like I bring this up all the time, but the wrestling games, WWE's license. Like there was two drastically different styles of games because they were made by two different developers. So it was almost like here's the wrestling games on N64 compared to PlayStation and how they were completely different, but same license.
And that was back when and it's funny because as the WWE got bigger, they kind of consolidated that, or then Ukes kind of like folded in other stuff, had to be kind of redeveloped or reorganized. But it's weird. There was a time when the WWE was very liberal with their license and wanted everybody to make WWE games, and they were all different. And now it's kind of like just 2K makes them, and they're all the same.
Unfortunately,
it's interesting once you get lots of money and you stop spending it,
right?
Or you spend it all in one place that maybe isn't the best place.
Yeah, exactly. But what's funny is, speaking of like how the wrestling games were, I read somewhere where like the company internally is actually separating to have a separate team make a different wrestling game under a different license.
Yeah, that story happened this week, I think.
Yeah, to like basically force competition.
To be its own competition.
Yeah, like they basically kind of said like, hey, if there's, and we've talked about it in this podcast, if there's no competition, what's your point of getting better? Like, those wrestling games have been the same for years, and they've kind of self-recognized that, which is very cool. Like, for them to realize, like, you know what? This shit's been the same, and we haven't been pushed. So let's make a team and compete against ourselves to be better. Like, that's crazy.
I wonder how that works, because that doesn't happen. Right. Like, it happens maybe, I think it might happen with with Call of Duties, because there's 3 teams.
Right, because that's where you but that's where you have like 3 different studios kind of working towards
but they are very actively competing with each other, whether they want to be or not, because Activision is making them, basically. But yeah, this is you don't hear the story often where a team splits itself up to compete with itself so that they can make a better game, hopefully, over the next.
But I mean, again, good on them, because again, they recognize, like, because the thing is, again, they sell games. So unless they notice a dramatic dip in games, for them to self-realize, like, wow, we need to do something, because like the games are kind of the same and they're not pushing anything. Like, good for them. So hopefully, again, that will make them better. Like, that will make overall that franchise better, and make, obviously their ultimate goal is to sell more copies, but just like overall bringing a better experience to gamers who want that. Like, there's nothing wrong with that at all.
And maybe like do something good for like that genre. That genre hasn't changed in a decade, it feels like.
Well, because like, who the hell's competing against it? Like, there's nothing. Now there's like the new wrestling organization that's coming up now that could potentially get.
Yeah, but that's still like, they're still probably at least 2 years away from making a video game product. They have to be on TV first.
Exactly. But again, like, I mean, any competition is going to make your product better, because when you're stale and stagnant, like, unfortunately, that's what happened with Madden. Like, when NFL 2K
when Madden was bought the 2K license, it was like, stop that.
When 2K came out and it was $20 and it sold like twice as many copies as Madden.
I remember loving 2005.
2K5 was fucking phenomenal.
2K5 was really good.
It was so good. And then Madden got scared as shit and threw that EA check out there so fast.
Yeah, and ESPN was like, all right.
Like, wait, what? NFL 10 years? And then, like, again, like, I've made fun of them before, but EA, stop fucking messing around with basketball. Just stop. Stop. Live will never be good.
No, I wonder, like, it has to make something, because why even continue doing this? Like, I mean, besides the fact that they don't want to just completely give up the entire market to 2K, I just don't know, like, what the motivation is to continue doing this, knowing that 2K has been eating their lunch for basically the dawn of time, it feels like. Right. And it's funny, because that's a great example of why they sort of like bit the bullet early and just spent as much money as possible locking down the ESPN license for or not the ESPN, locking down the NFL's license, because they didn't want 10 years later from the develop like the most popular football.
Exactly.
Game
they just wanted to.
They just couldn't do it for the NBA too.
Yeah, exactly. But I just tell them, hey, EA, just make a baseball game for Xbox, because I have a feeling if you made a baseball game for Xbox, you would sell more copies than you do live overall.
Honestly, like, I don't know why that hasn't happened yet. I have to imagine that the MLB is involved in why it hasn't happened yet. They don't
own like the show does not own the license exclusively. Like, 2K was making baseball games for a while, EA was making MVP baseball, and then they just stopped.
It's just weird that the show is the only baseball game
and it's
every
only
season.
On PlayStation, right?
And it's only on PlayStation. Like, you can make, like, there is no competition. Like, that market is yours,
right? And
I feel like I should
you're
make
missing an entire 2 consoles.
Xbox.
If they cared about it, if they cared to make Switch a baseball game for Switch, you're literally missing 2 console markets that don't have baseball games, but you still choose to make live. Fucking stupid.
I don't know.
Does not make sense. So as you were progressing though with gaming, did you ever fall out of gaming where gaming wasn't a habit of yours?
No, I think I was always playing them. I don't know that I was always playing them as frequently. I think the big changes happened when I was playing. I stopped playing like individual, like a single player games for a while. I
think everybody gets into that though. They get into that online stage where it's like being about social and stuff.
Like WoW kind of changed a lot for me.
Right.
Vanilla WoW, I played a lot of that instead of your traditional game, and that kind of I stopped playing a big variety of them and started just playing one a whole lot.
Right. You get into those moods though from time to time, like where I mean, that's how I am. I always have my like one forever game, I call it, where I just can play online all day, every day. But then I have the single player games that I go to. But like right now, Apex is the only thing I want to play. Like if I have time to play something, I'm just like, I can just go play Apex right now. And I mean, I have fucking Red Dead and Assassin's Creed and like other games to play, but like I just want to play Apex. It's like the only thing that's on my mind right now when I want to play games.
I think part of it is also like I am a pretty avid fighting game fan, so there isn't like when I have time to just play a game for like a half hour, I'm probably just practicing in something.
Right.
Like now it's been Mortal Kombat 11 for a while. But also like I used to be a bigger MOBA fan than I am now. So again, like after WoW, I began getting into like the one game I play all the time. Even now I've kind of like play it all again, but yeah, there was like a good, I want to say from like when I graduated high school, so like 2004, 2005 to like probably even as recent as 5 years ago, where like at that time between I really just played like 2 or 3 games, but I played the shit out of those 2 or 3 games.
Right. So that was, I mean, did you ever go back and experience some of the things you missed during that time?
Yeah, I still do now. Because a lot of that stuff is pretty accessible.
Right.
And for the most part, I did play as I went along as well. So like a lot of those things I didn't necessarily miss like
right.
the big titles didn't necessarily miss. But yeah, I've definitely found myself kind of shuffling backwards to find games that people talk about and like, man, I did miss that. Maybe I should go. And chances are that's like $20 now or maybe
right.
even cheaper. So yeah.
Has there been one game that's like that you definitely missed, haven't played yet, that people are just like, this is such a great game, this is one of the best games ever? Is there a game that's still out there that you haven't really touched?
No, I think the ones that people talk a lot about, I've at least attempted to experience in some way. There are a lot of small games that I've missed that I still kind of want to go back to. Like, I think I just bought Shadow Complex. Like,
that's a fun game.
Like a week ago, because that was and it remastered, so like it's easier to find now.
Sure.
So I can actually play that game.
Yeah, thanks to technology, that made it real easy to go back and play those games.
Yeah, like if I had to go buy a console, I'm not doing it.
Yeah,
like,
significantly harder to do.
But there's a lot. I find these all the time. And I don't always remember them at the time, but then they'll pop up and I'm like, I did miss that one. And then I'll like put it on a list and try to get time with it. But I find that that's kind of the big boon of how ubiquitous games are now. It's like, chances are a lot of people feel that way. Like either they remember this game from back in the day and want to play it again, or like they remember people talking about this game and never really got opportunity for it. But like through hook or crook, there's now a very available way to play it. So if you really want it, here it is. Like,
yeah, I mean, especially I would say PC gaming makes that considerably easier, just because if it's on PC, even if it's an older game, like you're still gonna be able to play it. You don't have to worry about going to hunt down the console and everything. Now I think though the good thing is like, especially Microsoft pushing backward compatibility, like they're getting to the point now where they're making old games digital to the point where you can go and buy them again, and that's a good initiative. Because I mean, I'm glad to see Sony now. It's like, yeah, we'll make PS5 backward compatible and all that stuff, because they realize now like you can't fucking do this anymore. You can't just like shut off something like that.
And more importantly, I think what they're really finding is there is an appetite for it. Because that was always the sort of argument against it, is that there have been no backwards compatible consoles with the exception of like the PS3.
Right.
Really.
Yeah.
And
like,
I guess
yeah.
the PS2, but like this isn't an industry standard. This is just something that Sony did, and then they just didn't do it, and then you missed it. But even then, people weren't buying the PlayStation 3 initially, even though it was backwards compatible. That wasn't the reason they weren't buying it, but that was one of the reasons you can sort of scapegoat as I'm not buying it, and then not spending as much time or money on an emulator that you would like. But I think this Xbox One stuff has reminded people that like people do actually want to play some of these older games, especially since there are way more people playing games now than ever that may not have actually had like the opportunity to play them when they came out. So like a lot of people that might play a game that's backwards compatible may have never played the game before. So like this is their opportunity to like interact with this thing that everybody else is looking at and remembers so fondly.
Right. And that was a big thing that I was happy when, you know, as a gaming culture, like, I mean, people, especially like, you know, now Nintendo's doing the whole, like, not Game Pass, but like virtual console stuff through their online thing. Like, hey, here's a bunch of NES games that a lot of people found fond of their memories, and, you know, here's a way to play them. Like, to be able to have, like, a machine that can play all those things. Technically, your PC is kind of that, but they're still your console exclusive, so you can't get on PC. But I mean, now the fact that these companies are like, you know, Microsoft's like trying so hard to even get like original Xbox games backward compatible is crazy. Like, cause they don't have to do that, but they kind of want to get to that point where their box is going to be able to play all of their generation of games in the past. So instead of having to buy an Xbox and then a 360 and then an Xbox One, you literally buy one machine that will be able to digitally play all these previous games. I think Sony will probably get to that point as well. They just, you know, right now, again, in a way, when you're winning, what do you have to do to be better? You don't really have to do shit because you already have 100 million consoles sold. I mean, I think next, that's the only thing that scares me because, like, again, you'll notice the trend is like when you're on top and you get cocky, you fuck up that next console, unfortunately, because you're not looking at it at the right perspective. Like, you know, PS2 came out, it was 150 million consoles sold or whatever, and then they were like, PS3, you'll get a second job to buy this, and everybody's like, fuck you, no, I won't. 360 sold all these, and they're like, oh, you're going to enjoy TV and NFL and Call of Duty, and they're like, no, we're not.
Yeah,
like,
I hope y'all love cameras because we got one.
Exactly. Like, again, like, you get that cockiness, and then you get humbled real fast when you stumble out of the gate. Now I'm scared Sony's going to do the same thing, where Sony could come out and say some wrong shit, and Microsoft's like, well, we have this, this, and this. And again, it's a bounce back and forth. I mean, Wii came out, and then Wii U was like, we can do whatever we want. We sold 100 million consoles. Wii U was a fucking joke, and now the Switch is killing it. Like,
well, I wonder, because everyone's kind of fucked up once now. So, like, maybe everyone's learned their lesson now as well.
I hope. I mean, the only thing that's crazy to me that I found out is the Switch sold more in Japan today. The Switch has sold more in Japan than PS4 has. PS4's been out PS4's been out for 3 years before the Switch was.
Yeah, and it sounds surprising, but Japan is such a small console mobile gaming sort of market that this actually sounds 100% right.
But how nuts is that?
But yeah, just sheer numbers and with the time, like, yeah, it seems it's incredible.
That's insane. So it just goes to show you too where like a majority of the consoles being sold for PlayStation aren't necessarily in Japan. Like, they're everywhere. Like, like
the North American market is the market for video games, but and you think like as Sony's a Japanese company, you think they'd have home team advantage, but even with 3 years, and Nintendo's like maybe more Japanese, but like it's clear what Japanese want to play,
and it's on the go.
Small consoles that you can take with you wherever you want to go.
100%. So as far as it goes, what are your gaming habits like today? Like, are you, obviously you're writing and you're producing content for websites and podcasts and all that. I mean, are you still able to play games as often today as you were back then? I mean, obviously when you're an adult, you have more responsibilities and things like that, but what are your habits like today?
Yeah, definitely not as often. And I think especially since there's a great chance that either I'm playing something for review or for some other content, or, there's something coming up that I am playing a game for that takes up a lot of my time. So I have to sort of resort back to like the one game I'm working on at a time sort of thing. And that game can switch. Like I have plenty in rotation, and I tend to play games that are more open-ended nowadays because I can always come back to them.
Of course, yeah.
There's no narrative I have to remember, really. I don't really have the time for like super long games anymore. I tried I try to fit them in where I can, but like the last long game I played was I can't remember. I mean, probably something this year, but But yeah, I try to get gaming in a sort of more smaller experiences now.
Right.
Or at least I can think games I can play in smaller bursts nowadays.
Right, just because time-wise, I mean, it's hard to put 100 hours into, like, a story-driven game when, you know... Like,
yeah,
that's how I feel about Assassin's Creed. Like, it's a great game, but, like, when I find out it's 65 hours for the main story, I'm like, if I play 30 minutes, it's not going to do shit. Like,
that's why I haven't played Red Dead, and I probably never will, because I have... The time investment you have to make to even get into, like, the story, like, the game, is so great that I would play 4 or 5 sessions of that before I got to something.
Exactly.
And it's like, I don't really know that I have time for that.
I could play so many games of Apex before I figure out this story arc in Red Dead. And I'm not saying
a lot of these stories are like not even worth it to me. Like, I feel like a lot of these big bloated sort of open world experiences don't tell their stories all that well anyway. So it's like, I'm spending all this time for something I could probably have spent half or even a fraction of the time to get a better experience out of wholly. Like, if there was no story and it was just me doing something or whatever, I'd find the gameplay loop more interesting than I found the story that I've spent all this time with.
Right. No, I mean, like I said, some games are worth it, but then some games obviously definitely aren't. So I'm
it's hard to find which ones are. And
exactly.
I think I found myself a bit less willing to try a narrative game that I don't think I'm sold on immediately already, like before I pick it up, than I would be years ago. Or if I do find a way to rent or something, I find no real need or like compulsion myself to finish it if I'm not completely into it.
Also, too, if I find a game's only like 10 hours long, that's way more appealing than a game that's 60.
Yeah, like you could say if your game's 7 hours, I'm probably playing it.
Yeah, like, exactly. Like real quick, Wolfenstein, such good games. And when they're like 10-hour games, I'm like, done. Let's go. Let's get this out of the way. And it's good games too. Like they're great. Like they're super fun games. So that's actually right now. If I look at like what games am I excited for next, it's literally the new Wolfenstein. Like other than that, I don't really care about any other games that are happening right now. I'll just play what I got until Wolfenstein happens.
It was just the irony is I'll put like lots and lots of hours in games. Like I put, I think something like 250 hours into Monster Hunter World last year.
Right.
But that's because I could play that game. I can play like a hunt might last anywhere between 20 to 40 minutes.
Exactly.
I can do a hunt a night or
quick,
as many hunts as I want and never have to commit to this long thing. And that's way more compelling to me than me waiting for this, like the story beat to end so I can go do something. And if the story beat isn't great, then I'm not going to be into it anyway.
Makes complete sense. That's exactly how I am as well. So, the one question I tend to ask every guest now, I'm trying to make sure I remember, a lot of people get bad gifts, and if it's a bad gaming gift, you know, you're like, oh, that sucks, but it was a gift. It wasn't a big deal. Do you remember the worst game you bought with your own money?
Lair.
That's a very fair one, because that game's controls are fucking bad.
Lair, like I said earlier, there's very few games that are just trash. Lair is one of those games.
That's 100% one. When Greg Miller doesn't like it, and it's a PlayStation exclusive game, you know, like, yo, you fucked up.
It's like, I don't know what went on in Factor 5. I know what went on. Sony was like, we can't get DualShock or we can't get Rumble on our DualShocks anymore, so we're not making DualShocks. We're making this motion thing. So you got to get the 6-axis thing working.
Yep.
And Factor 5 was like, all right, but like, I mean, that's cool, but do we have to? And they're like, yes. And you know, it'd be really cool if your Dragon flew with 6-axis controls. And they're like, fuck.
Said no one ever, but they did.
And God damn it. Like, that game is like, it like doesn't want you to play it.
No,
it's
like
so
grenade
aggressively
in
not.
Uncharted 1. It's so bad.
It's like, why? Like, this isn't, there's not, at least in Uncharted 1, those moments come and go. They're not like the whole game. Exactly, and they patched it out. So and they would eventually patch Lair. But
no, the whole controls of the game, no thank you.
Like,
that's not fun.
Literally from when you get on the dragon's back and to when you get off the dragon's back is you with a stupid fucking controller.
Right.
Trying to like dip it under so you can fly under bridges and shit. And then the fact that the game itself isn't even great.
Right.
So it's like you don't have to struggle for a mediocre ass game that doesn't even look good. The story doesn't make any sense. Like, God, like that's the perfect example. Like if that was just a DualShock 3, like whatever the fuck game, and you can control the dragon with normal like dual stick controls,
it might not
would have
be
been fun.
bad.
Would have been fine.
Yeah,
that'd have been like a 5, and it would have been fine.
That shit's like a 2.
It's like that's a 2 at best. It's
right.
The worst thing I've bought.
Fair, and that's a game that hasn't been brought up yet, but as soon as you said it, I'm like, oh yeah, that's 100% a game I can see that being.
Absolutely fucked by it.
It's just so bad. So, well, if people want to check you out on the internet, where would they go?
Easiest place is at Jarrett John on Twitter, because that's where I try to remember to pimp all my shit. I am the editor at large, features editorials editor at irrationalpassions.com. Alex O'Neill, another kind of funny guy, his baby from 10 years ago. I've been pretty integral in making the editorial on that site a thing. When I started many years ago, there was no editorial. It was kind of just a podcast. We go to PAX, we go to shows and interviews and all that kind of stuff. Me and my friends Logan and George and Mike and Scott, and yeah, they're all out there. We're doing good work over there. That's where the bulk of all the stuff I interact with. I don't necessarily make content as often as I'd like on that website anymore, but I've probably touched everything that comes out of it at least. I also freelance. You can find some of my work at Gamepedia, which is a Wikipedia site was once owned by Twitch, now owned by Fandom, which is like the big wiki site on the internet. I also write reviews. You can see some of my bylines at PlayStation Lifestyle, at Pocket Tactics, at some older bylines at Playboy.com, if that's still there. I don't even know anymore. I haven't checked.
Yeah.
And I think I still have 1 or 2 things up at IGN. Check those. I'm out here. I'm on the internet.
Yeah, you're all over the place. So, and if people want to check out any of those things, I'll have links in the show notes so you can check out all the things that he does there. So, dude, thank you so much for being on my show. Thank you for sharing all of your stories with me, man. I really do appreciate it.
Oh, it's good to chat about what keeps us going here.
Absolutely,
it's reaffirming.
Whole point of the show. That's why I just want to get everybody's opinions and see what everybody had to go through. So, again, man, thank you so much.
No problem.
And again, thank you, Jarrett, for being on the show. Guys, if you want to check him out on Twitter, go ahead and follow him at Jarrett John. It's like lawn with a J. So I'll have links in the show notes there, as well as links for all of his other items. So you can check out all of his words on Pocket Tactics, PS Lifestyle, Curse Gamepedia, and Irrational Pod. Of course, also he has an MMA podcast, which is quite funny because me and him talked for about 45 minutes before we actually recorded the show about MMA. So I could have done a guest spot on his show right there. But again, links in the show notes for all of the above, so feel free to check it out there. Guys, if you want to be on the show just like he was, send me a tweet at MitchPower1116 on Twitter, or at the podcast Twitter page, which is at GUGpodcast.com. Not .com, just at GUG Podcast. But that's also a website, GUGpodcast.com, so you can check things out there. We also have a Facebook group. Go ahead and check it out there, Growing Up Gaming, as well as on YouTube, search GUG Podcast. Guys, thank you so much for all your support. If you guys really like the show, feel free to leave me a review on iTunes or whatever platform you guys use. Thumbs up videos, all of the above. Just get more exposure to the show, get more people interested in being a guest on the show, because that's my ultimate goal, is to have a listener want to be a guest, because I absolutely love hearing everybody's stories. So thank you guys so much. Don't forget to share the show with friends, rate on iTunes, all the things normal podcast people tell you to do. If you want to do it, cool. If not, I get it. You got better things to do with your time. So either way, thank you guys for listening, and I will catch you guys next week with another new episode. See ya.